Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our second speaker series on Thailand's social science speaker series that we recently launched in partnership between the Nordic Institute of Asian Studies, Columbia University, and University of Sydney. And this is our very first one that's being hosted from Australia. And we are very lucky to have Ajahn Pavin Chachavalpongpun today. But first, I'd like to open with a welcome to the country. We acknowledge the traditional owners of the lands on which Sydney University is located, the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, and we pay our respect to the knowledge embedded forever within the original custodianship of this country. Ajahn Pavin has, in so many ways, almost needs no introduction, but I'd like to give an introduction to him anyway. He is the associate professor at Kyoto in the Center for Southeast Asian Studies at Kyoto University. He works primarily on US foreign relations with Thailand, but also including other countries in Southeast Asia, such as Myanmar. He is a very prolific writer, podcaster, and also an academic who really goes out of his way in many ways to open up discussions about politics in Thailand around the world, and is one of those highly sought after speakers that many seminars would like to have for his very engaging and thought-provoking discussion. So today he's going to be presenting the work that he really started when he first came to be our visiting fellow at the Sydney Southeast Asia Center a couple of years ago. And we're really happy for him to update this talk today. And the talk is entitled The United States and the Thai Royal Family from a Historical Perspective. The entire presentation is recorded and is broadcasted live on Facebook. We have a speaker schedule every month, rotating between North America, Europe, and Asia Pacific in terms of time. But please check our website, Sydney Southeast Asia Center, for the upcoming talks, or our Facebook page, Thailand Social Science Speaker Series TS4. So welcome, Ajahn Pavin. The floor is yours. You have 20 minutes, and we have a chat function on Zoom that allows participants to be able to pose questions as we go on. We will keep 40 minutes for Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Aim. Sorry, and it's nice to see you. Well, indeed, Aim, this project started when I went to Sydney at the Southeast Asia Center, and since then it has been delayed because of COVID, because the majority of this work has to rely on historical document, and I could only get it from United States. So as you know, throughout 2020, I would not be able to travel. No one would be able to travel anyway. So just only recently that I had a chance to return to the US and manage to bring back some document. Again, it's still not enough. There's tons of document, as you know. I still have to keep going back to the US, to Nara, in order to bring back some more. So just enough to say for now that this project started in 2019 in September at the Southeast Asia Center. Kylie granted me some fund to do some work in Australia. The project is basically looking at the relationship between the United States and the royal family from historical perspective. So we're not only looking into the current or contemporary relationship between the two parties, but my plan is to go back to see where it all started, right? The key point here is basically to examine the relationship between, as I said, US and Thai monarchy. And I would also like to correct the misperception, because usually when you talk about the US and Thailand, I mean, in general, most people would argue that you could only see the intensity of this relationship in the Cold War, or at least, prior to the Cold War, toward the end of the Second World War. And before that, people almost did not talk about the role of the United States in Siam or in Thailand. simply also maybe because of the colonial politics that tend to eclipse the role of the United States in Southeast Asia. So I think for me, and in pursuing this project, I can say that that has been a misperception, because through my research, I have seen that the US, had engaged quite actively with Siam, Thailand in the past, prior to the Cold War. And I think I could also argue that that could be a part of the US preparation to become, the world leader or superpower, in the post-colonial period. So again, in my discovery, the US has long engaged with Thailand, Siam, the monarchy since the 19th century, right? There's some documents showing that the U.S. attempted, to influence the Siamese bureaucracy. I would call it bureaucratic infiltration. That sounds a little bit like James Bond's, but in fact, it is quite true that the U.S. had played some role in the Thai bureaucracy. For example, you would see telegram like this, from the United States, informing what happening in Siam. I picked this one, in 1910, written by the embassy in Bangkok, sending to the department, the State Department, informing the passing of King Chulalongkorn, right? And then this is the succession of King Washirawut. So basically, I know this seemed to be quite normal. Whatever happened, usually the embassy would report back to the headquarters. So, but I just thought that this is such an interesting piece of document informing Washington D.C. of the passing of King Chulalongkorn in 1910. Well, historically speaking, this relationship started in 1818. So Thailand is the first ally of the United States in Asia Pacific, the oldest ally of all. When Stephen Williams, steer his ship called, I think called Persia, somehow the ship, up Chao Phraya River in 1818. And since, it's established the diplomatic relationship between the two countries, by then it was President James Monroe, which coincided with the reign of King Rama II. I also found some other report. For example, I don't know whether anyone come across the William Bradley report in 1851, which this report basically talk about the royal succession of King Rama IV or King Mongkut. It's very interesting in this report as well. The Bradley wrote some observation, particularly focusing on Britain and United States, of how Britain and United States, had keen interest in the royal succession in Thailand in 1851. Out of any other European nations, maybe you can talk about France, Holland, something like that. But then I was quite surprised to see the United States being mentioned quite prominently in that report as well. And then there is always this tale of King Mongkut, offer to send elephant, to assist in the American Civil War. I have to show you this photo. Basically, is a note from Abraham Lincoln, president, thanking the king for the elephant. But in fact, there was no sending whatsoever, because it was considered to be no use by them. Anyway, okay, move to right now. I am working on this particular period because this is where I get most of the document from 1900 to 1925. Basically, these were the periods of King Rama VI in particular, from the end of Rama V. From the end of Rama V to the reign of Rama VI, from Chulalongkorn to Washirawut. So mainly I have been working on telegram between Bangkok and Washington. And what the United States really interested in this period. So what I found out was basically the US was interested in politics of Siam, such as royal succession. Yeah, the first one. Second one, interested in the budget, of the monarchy. And I think this one quite interesting as well, because when they look at the budget, especially allocated for the monarchy in particular, the US sort of came to the conclusion that because of the misuse of the budget, that represented a factor to the abolition of the absolute monarchy. So you started to see the political development in Thailand, as reported in the telegram from the United States. The third one would be the issue of republicanism back then. And there would be some discussion on the personality of the king. I think I have shown this in Sydney. I would like to show it again. So this is just a page of report from embassy in Bangkok to Washington, D.C. And if you could see the last sentence, King Washila Wood is unmarried, and it is common belief that he has no harem. So I find it quite, again, very fascinating that there would be this kind of report. Perhaps maybe in contrast to the previous reign under Jelongkorn, when there were a lot of harems. So, and then lastly, the report also on the European influence in Siam as well. The American role. Okay, during this period, 1900 to 1925, even though the US was not yet a superpower, but definitely what I can trace is the US had expansionist ambition. So in other words, there is a kind of even colonial ambition vis-a-vis Siam. But in saying that, I'm not trying to conclude that the US wanted to colonize Siam or anything. But at least, in trying to exert influence in Siam vis-a-vis other European powers, especially the British in particular, definitely the US wanted to compete, with European power by, looking at the Philippines as, colony of the United States back then, in comparing with Britain colonizing any other Southeast Asian state. So again, I would argue that the US was on its way to become superpower later on. Bureaucratic infiltration, I said earlier. So let's talk about infiltration of the United States in general first, not particularly through the bureaucracy. You started to see the work from the Presbyterian missionaries from the United States, which had been very, very enthusiastic in working in Thailand, mostly through medical, educational, and evangelical works, though by using the Philippines once again, as a model, for example, for education, the promotion of education in Thailand and sanitation. US also was very enthusiastic in sending, key experts to help Siam, especially in negotiating treaties with the European power. And in this case, I will also study the work of Francis Bizet. Francis Bizet had such great role as a special advisor to the Kingdom of Siam, especially in our negotiation of treaty with Britain and France. Yeah, and not only that, Francis also gave a lot of advice, to member of royal family, including, in their even education overseas. This is a footnote that Francis Bizet was the one who helped recommend the Mahidol family to relocate to Lausanne, for example. So it was the advice from Francis. And the third one, which this part I find it the most useful, and I'm very excited to continue my work on the bureaucratic infiltration, because in the record in 1920, even though I will show you a little bit later, even though the number of US experts in the Thai bureaucracy was much lower than the numbers of other European nations, but it shows somehow the level of the American interest in firming up its relationship with Siam. There's by 1920, there were 8 nations sending experts to work in the Thai bureaucracy. 8 nations included Britain, France, Italy, Denmark, Holland, Norway, Portugal, and the United States. So I can say that, out of this nation, Britain dominated the Thai bureaucracy, undoubtedly. Britain sent hundreds of experts to work in various ministries, during that period. And don't forget that Thailand just came out of the modernization program, first initiated by King Mongkut, and then, to further proceeded by King Jalongkorn for the modernization of the bureaucracy. The United States sent in 1920 7 experts in the following fields: medical officer in health in the public, medical officer of health in the public health ministry, in the Royal Siam State Railways, University Department, mostly in medical studies, and also to help in the Foreign Ministry. So just want to show you this. I know it's a bit too small, but if you can see that this is the statistic in 1920, you can also see that Britain sent 107 experts, whereas the United States sent only 7 out of 8 countries. Yep. And then from 1903, yep, you can see here 1903 until 1928, the United States sent altogether 34 experts to work in various departments in Thailand. So I will go very quickly. You see number 1, and then I'll show you the last one, number 34. So, okay, I guess I have like less than 10 minutes now. I will start to talk about the last part of my lecture today. Moving on from the American role during the colonial period, to the Cold War. So this part I have not started, but to be honest, I do not worry so much because there's a vast number of literature in the Cold War period, especially the relationship between United States and King Bhumibol. King Bhumibol was crowned in 1946. So basically he came just right almost at the beginning of the Cold War. So, and then throughout the Cold War, that the monarchy and the military basically together dominated Thai politics. And in this period, you also observe the strengthening of relationship between the United States and the 2 key institutions as well. Obviously, the United States supported a series of military government in Thailand under the pretext of war against communism. The US, this is very important. The United States helped legitimize the political role of King Bhumibol in the eye of the public. Basically, there's a saying in the State Department that King Bhumibol was American king for the fact that the king was born in the United States. So I think this kind of thing has become such a discourse that further, consolidate relationship between the Thai royal family and the United States. And this was very crucial, during the Cold War in the fight against communist threat. So from Korean War to the Cold War, to SEATO, right, Southeast Asia Treaty Organization, and to the communist threat in Thailand. These triangular relationship, United States, military, and the royal family work together in implementing a kind of policy. What kind of policy? The policy that was pro-United States, anti-communist, pro-monarchy, and also pro-military foreign policy. I would also plan to focus specifically on the 2 visits of King Bhumibol to the United States. The first one was more important than the second one. The first one came in 1960 from 14 June until 15 July, exactly a month in the United States. It was more important because, you can say that this was an introductory tour of King Bhumibol. Very interesting as well because, as I said, the king was crowned in 1946. It took the king 13 years before he started overseas trip. Mainly to introduce himself, and the United States was very important, in the war against communists back then. The second trip began in 1967 from the 6th to the 20th of June. Why? Very interesting during this period. I would like to bring to attention the role of the U.S. ambassador to Bangkok, William Donovan. William Donovan's a very interesting figure because he was the one who recommended the king to start the domestic tour, especially to remote area in the Northeast region. Northeast region was considered to be the sort of the bulwark, the place where the communists, were together. So it would be useful for the king to visit, those remote area in order to, as a part of a war against, communist threat as well. So that was the beginning of the king visit, to various places in Thailand, and it was to be combined with the developmental project. So all of this partly, helped recreate the image of King Bhumibol, not only for the political reason of a battle against communism, but also as a devoted king, as a developmental king, So it's just basically go hand in hand. But I have to say that there's going to be more work to be done in this period. Lastly, during the current period, the period of King Vajiralongkorn. So I will also have to talk about relationship between the monarchy and the current king as well. So, there might not be a lot to talk about, given that the king has been on the throne for only 5 years. And there has been no international tour yet, right? As I said, King Bhumibol waited for 13 years, to start the international tour. We really don't know whether King Vajiralongkorn would do the same thing or not. But back then, when King Bhumibol started the tour, he was 32. But right now, the king's almost approaching 70. So time is not on the side of the current king. So he's already the oldest monarch to be enthroned, in the history of Thailand. The key argument here is that if the Cold War has become a condition for engagement between U.S. and the royal family, and in many ways, if King Bhumibol perceived the Cold War to be a condition for political alliance with the United States, what is happening now when we no longer have the Cold War? So I think right now my argument would be that the end of the Cold War somehow unlocked that condition and also expectation from the United States vis-a-vis the monarchy. So, and I think King Vajiralongkorn might be taking advantage from that. So there's a lot of issue of interest, in the United States for the king that might prevent his engagement with the United States as well. He has his former wife there, he has his 4 sons being in exile there. I don't know, this could become a kind of barrier in the relationship between the current king and the United States. And then we have to talk about this relationship in the context of US-China rivalry. And I have seen it more and more of the tilting toward China, not only from the Thai government, but also from the Thai monarchy as well. I'm sorry to show this photo. William Donovan, the ambassador who suggested the domestic tour to King Bhumibol. And there could be something to talk about between leadership of King Vajiralongkorn and the Chinese leadership, throughout COVID period. the king sent a sympathetic message to the Chinese government, and also even send medical equipment to help out the Chinese counterpart as well. I would end by saying that, and also this is at the very early stage of my research. I had a chance to visit Washington, D.C. Previously and interview someone from the State Department, and then to ask them about what they think about the relationship between the current king and the US government right now. Somehow, though, the State Department seemed to be confident that at the end of the day, the monarchy will still be with the United States, despite the influence of China. But without elaborating anything, I don't know, maybe the US might continue to rely on existing mechanism in order to boost this bilateral relationship. Existing mechanism, not only close relationship between the leadership between the two countries, but also military mechanism like the Cobra Gold, this and that, which I do not have time to talk about it. So that's it really, the introduction to my work so far up to now. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Prof Pavin. So the floor is open now. You're able to post a question in the Q&A anonymously as well, if you like, or you could also raise your hand and I'll call on you. So while waiting for participant to pose some questions, I thought I'll just ask Ajahn Pavin. Could you tell us a little bit about the kind of collections that are important for your research, archival collections, both in Australia and the US, that will be critical for your work? Yeah.
Well, definitely in the United States, as I said, there's a lot and lots of articles, so of a document. Had I had time to stay for a month or 2 months, I would be busy every day. So but obviously I can't stay for that long. That's why there's still a lot of document left. Right now, I only go into what we call telegram, right? I don't know whether a lot of people would understand what telegrams are. Telegram.
Not the app, not the social media app Telegram.
No.
It's another Telegram.
No. Telegram is such an old word, obsolete word. Telegram basically is actual telegram in the past that, not the app, definitely. So basically it's a correspondence between the diplomatic mission of United States in Bangkok, as a mean to communicate with the headquarters in Washington, D.C. And the closest thing that you can imagine, if you look into WikiLeaks, right, that came out a decade ago, that exactly, time has changed, but the mean of communication has not changed much. Because whatever you see in the 19th century back then through telegram, today they continue to send telegram in the form of telegram, funny enough, but obviously they send it through the internet this day, but they still call it telegram. And I recall it so vividly that during my time in the Thai Foreign Service, I have to continue to write telegram on a daily basis. Then people could not understand why. Oh my God, back then in 2010, why Pavin was still writing a telegram. Yeah, basically looking into telegram like that. Mainly, I can't do any other thing. I can't even look at any other report, from the Congress, from the State Department. There's a lot of things to look at. Some sort of special report, confidential report, summary, annual summary, this and that. A lot to do. And then partly also that there's some document that have not been opened yet, had not been declassified. So there's nothing I can do if the document cannot be classified. In Australia, so I was so fortunate to be able to access archive, at Duntroon. Duntroon is the military academy in Australia. So during my visit to Australian National University in Canberra, I spent some time, at Duntroon to dig it up, a document on especially during Crown Prince Vajiralongkorn staying there as student. So, and I have dug up a lot of document. It's an assorted kind of documents, from his personal report. The king also wrote his own personal report during his time at Duntroon. There is also a kind of evaluation of the king performance, from Duntroon. There also report from how his colleague at Duntroon seeing his performance, all these kind of things. So, but I have not started reading it yet, but I have some, with me here. So it will take some time. And I remember as well that there's any other document in the National Library, in the library in Canberra. And if you remember, I need to seek your help in borrowing those books. And you were so kind to photocopy everything and send it back to me in Kyoto. Thank you so much.
Great. Well, now we have lots of questions. So we'll start with the first one. Was it an option for Thailand not to be aligned with the US when King Bhumibol took the reign? Were there any other world political alignment as an option?
Yeah, I mean, thank you so much for this question. I think we almost have no option. The fact that the US came to the rescue of Thailand toward the end of the Second World War because we sided with Japan, right? That almost became an obligation that we could not really walk away from it. Yeah, the game of politics that Thailand got involved prior to the Cold War became a condition for Thailand to have to seek political alliance, the only option, unlike any other country as well. For example, unlike Burma, unlike Indonesia, that they could afford neutral stance in their foreign policy. For Burma, because of the communists, because of being colonized by Britain, because of the power from China. All these things sort of allow Burma to welcome, to embrace, isolationism, right? But this is not the case of Thailand. So in other words, yeah, there seems to be no option, and I guess that because the US came to the rescue of Thailand at the time of the rise of the United States as well. So Thailand thought that this was very lucky that for once, if we want to side with a power, we side with the right side of the power. You know what I mean? And what else gonna say? I forgot. Yeah.
Okay, we have lots of questions. Thank you. Moving on. I'm just gonna, because there's so many anonymous questions, I'll just alternate between anonymous and ones with name. So the next question comes from Greg Raymond at ANU. There's been a lot of commentary about Kamala Harris and the US Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin not visiting Thailand recently, and also setting up a center for disease control in Vietnam. How do you read this? Do you think the US is losing interest in Thailand as an ally?
Yeah, I think so. I have also followed, even though not closely, the closing up of the relationship between United States and Vietnam as well. Where Vietnam has long been a darling of Southeast Asia, and Thailand domestic politics has somehow prevented, the Thai Foreign Ministry, from coming up with a foreign policy that would accommodate the changing, at least regional environment. I'm not even talking about international environment. I'm just talking about, in the context of the region. I think this has long been my argument. I don't think Thailand has any real foreign policy since the end of the Thaksin era. From the Thaksin era, Thailand has steeped deeper into a domestic crisis, and foreign policy has been implemented in order to get Thailand out of domestic crisis, rather than paying attention to, once again, what's going on in the region. So, I mean, you don't have to even go to the issue of the US-Vietnam renewed relationship. Some other outstanding issues in the region, for example, the conflict in the South China Sea. Even though Thailand is not one of the claimants, you hardly see the position of of Thailand on that critical issue. Maybe Thailand could argue that because Thailand had nothing to do with it, but it is very untrue. Because whatever happened to the South China Sea, even though Thailand is not a claimant, it will always cause an impact on the security of Thailand anyway. But Thailand refused to make any position, maybe partly because Thailand doesn't want to upset China, and another part, being a member of ASEAN as well, so it kind of a dilemma for Thailand too. And Thailand quite good at playing around with this sort of dilemma as an excuse for not doing anything.
Well, moving on. Okay, next question as an anonymous participant. Can you say that since Bill Donovan was so involved with the OSS and the CIA, that the CIA planned the course for the Thai king in the early years and maybe throughout the Cold War? Is there any document to say the CIA was responsible for any of these programs?
Yes. Yeah. Oh my God, tons of documents. I really don't know where to start. This has to be perhaps, most difficult part for this project. It would be a book. So, and I don't know whether I would enjoy doing it. Sometimes when you have so much document, it's very difficult to screen, which should be the most important. Yeah, but there's a lot of things. I mean, the involvement of CIA, in Thailand domestic politics. It go into the detail of, which political factions that the United States, became a supportive of, starting off with maybe willing to work with Preedy at the end of the day, being a part of getting rid of Preedy as well. So, I mean, this is no longer just an issue of international relations or bilateral tie between Thailand /monarchy/military and the United States, but somehow the US becomes so deeply involved in domestic politics in Thailand in order to help strengthen authoritarian regime, in order to help in the war against communism, but in so doing, automatically helping to entrench the position of the military and monarchy in politics.
All right, following on to that. Okay, another one from anonymous participant. In the context with declining public reverence of the monarchy, how do you think this will change the dynamics in the relationship between the US and the Thai monarchy? Will the US try to distance itself and weaken their relationship with the monarchy?
Well, I mean, this is very interesting as well, and I myself would like to find out. That's why, in my discussion with State Department personality not long ago, there seems to be some hidden message. The hidden message is that, well, I wouldn't say this is verbatim, but something like, well, the United States is very confident that King Vajiralongkorn would want to value his relationship with the United States. But we also observe the close relationship between the monarchy and China as well. And should the king choose his relationship with China over the United States, there would be consequence. That what was said. So I did not ask, what kind of consequence. Well, what this really telling us, I don't know. I think it might be telling us that, the declining reference of the monarchy will somehow cause a shift or an impact in the bilateral relationship. So, I mean, okay, bear with me. What I'm trying to say is that up to this point, no matter what happened to Thailand domestic politics, no matter what happened to the Thai monarchy, the United States seemed to hold on to it Cold War mentality. What is the Cold War mentality? The Cold War mentality is that the monarchy and the military, they were the most trusted institution for the United States. So as long as the two institutions are, alive, and healthy, then the United States doesn't have to be worried about anything. Yeah. So that's why, when the monarchy seemed to be under threat, supposedly because of Thaksin, you also started to see the US coming out to condemn Thaksin as well. I said this so many times that, in the aftermath of the coup of 2006, if you go back and read, the congressional report, there's a lot of finger pointing at Thaksin, as being the root cause of the Thai crisis, without mentioning the role of the military and the monarchy as well. But I think that maybe with the declining power of the monarchy, the US might have to rethink its policy in order to win over, should there be an emerging democratic government coming out of Thailand. I would leave by saying that the comment made by, I think, National Security Secretary, right, Jake Sullivan, about the worrying trend of the use of lèse majesté in Thailand, not long after Biden, became president. Maybe that might be a good indication that United States want to be very serious about any issue caused by the monarchy or caused by the declining power of the monarchy. So let's wait and see. It's too soon anyway, as I said, because we are at the early stage of the Vajiralongkorn period.
Okay, great. Next question is, what was the king's positionality towards the US during the anti-US movement back in the 1970s?
Well, I think no, I have not delved into this particular question, but I guess that given the interdependent relationship between the monarchy and the United States, I think that possibly the king may be trying to play down the anti-American sentiment in Thailand, right? But I mean, I can't say for sure. I have to say it because I have not gone into this document. But thank you so much for this question. I'll go back and look at it because then that involved with the war with Vietnam as well, right? That involved with the United States role, not only in Thailand but in Southeast Asia, and what came after that, meaning that the withdrawal of the United States and whatever left for Thailand, including the American base, military base here. So I'm sorry, I can't. I have to go back and have a look at the documents.
Well, on that note, we had an offer from an attendee who said it would be helpful for an American to file Freedom of Information Act request for you to release some of the documents you said were not publicly available. So I'll just leave it as that. Okay, great. So bringing a bit forward to more contemporary times, Sek Sopal asked, you talked briefly about the US-Thailand Security Alliance. I wonder if you can talk a little bit about the rationale of the US-Thailand alliance in the 21st century. It was a very broad question, but specifically whether or not Thailand is leaning towards China.
Yeah, I think I don't know whether the US, I mean, it seemed like the US would shift its attention, from Thailand to a country like Vietnam, because I mean, looking at the when you talk about military alliance between the US and any other country in Southeast Asia, and in this case, with Thailand, you cannot just talk about military between the two countries. Now, the China factor is so important that you have to think about it. Now, looking at the position of Thailand vis-a-vis China, that is very difficult for the United States, right? Because I think, and especially during the political crisis in Thailand, we are still during the political crisis. not doing anything vis-a-vis domestic politics in Thailand, the US would also be condemned, by the American public, maybe by the international community for being a good friend of Thailand, but not helping to push toward democratization. Pushing Thailand too hard on that, then the US would only push Thailand into the orbit of China. So I think it's very difficult. It's a difficult question for the United States to move anything further from the current situation. But I mean, for Vietnam, it might be easier for the United States, given the clear position of Vietnam toward China, if you know what I'm trying to say here. So that's why when you talk about US design for a future military alliance or in the 21st century, China has to be considered. And because of that, I am not sure now whether how the US would want to see the military alliance between itself and Thailand. You know that Cobra Go has continued to remain the largest military exercise in Asia Pacific yet, but it's no longer just within the two countries, because over the years, Cobra Go has extended to expand, other members. The center might be shifted, from Thailand to somewhere else, depending on the position of Thailand vis-a-vis China, I would say.
The next question from an anonymous attendee. Do you think there's much variation in the Thai-US relationship according to US party lines? Does the relationship vary between Democrat or Republican presidents?
I don't think so. Well, I mean, and this has proven true, in the past at least 2 or 3 decades, that the US policy has almost never changed, no matter, during which period of domestic politics inside the United States, either under, the Democrat or the Republican. There might be time that during the Democrat Party, that the US would pay more interest, in, I would say, politics of Southeast Asia, if not Thailand in particular. For example, there's a lot of talk of the US being Pacific power in order to attest, to its friend, in Asia, that the US had not been going away. We have been here as a Pacific power. Or the fact that Obama decided to be very interested in Southeast Asia, the fact that the US decided to join the East Asia Summit, almost the last country to do so, that maybe seem to signal the growing interest of the US, particularly from the Democrat Party. But again, it has proven that the interest has never been sustainable. Just when you think that the Democrat Party might be more interested than any other, than the Republican, in engaging with Southeast Asia. Eventually, when there's something more important happening inside the United States, it would not send the head of state to participate in ASEAN Summit, for example. ASEAN Summit is basically where the head of the state would come together and meet once a year. As much as the Democrat Party talks so much about wanting to show the commitment of the United States with Southeast Asia, but then when something happened in the US could easily bypass, ASEAN. So to answer this question, I do not see much difference in the policy position from neither parties.
Next question from Jai Ruffles. In what way do you think Vajiralongkorn's ex-wives and his sons could be a barrier to relations with the US? Is it as simple as a personal grudge makes diplomacy difficult, or could there be broader consequences?
I just think that it is a baggage. It is a baggage that the king doesn't want to accept. That at the end of the day, that's his ex-wife, and for I would say legitimate son, basically is his own son, still living in the United States, and and I think it had been a thorn in Washington trying to get into the United States. Given that recently some member, of his ex-family, ex-wife family started to become politically active as well. So, especially active in the United States. Of course, it has to be in the United States because they can no longer go back to Thailand, right? So, yeah, I mean, some member of that family start to go out and about meeting with Thai community in the United States. So that seemed to suggest a kind of political activism on that part, and I think it can become an issue. I mean, this is just my own interpretation, but there could be any other thing. There could be any other thing that is more structural than just about family business, if you know what I mean. Because we could not just say that the king disinterest in the United States just because of his family. I think that the ex-family could play a part. But I think in terms of a grand policy, I think somehow the king find more comfort in talking to like-minded leaders. And in this case, in the context of in the context of the US-China rivalry, I think the king find more comfort in talking to the Chinese leadership rather than the US leadership, simply because of the similarity in the political attitude, if you want to say so. I think I did write something similar to this, of the rise of illiberal regimes in Southeast Asia and China. And it seemed that, this kind of illiberal regime seem to get along quite easily because of a similar, political mindset. I'm talking about, leadership of Thailand, of Myanmar, of Cambodia, of Laos, of China seem to come together, if not together as a group, but you started to see the proliferation of these prosperous bilateral relationship with China as a center, something like that. So I think it kind of come down to how the king feel comfortable, in engaging with China more than with the United States. And in any case, the United States is a bit too far for Thailand.
Okay, great. Well, following right on to that question, do you see any context in which the current king would visit the US?
I can't see any. I really want to see it. I really want to see not just him visiting United States. I want to see his international tour. I mean, I know when I say that this has been a tradition, it's very difficult to say whether this is a tradition, because we only started to see only during drama night, yeah, and when Siam became Thailand, became modernized. So we only started with King Ramadan, in fact. So there is only one or two, in international visit of our monarch, right? So in some way I can't say tradition. But when I say tradition, because elsewhere, when you have head of the state coming up, right? Introductory tour is very important. In fact, it's basically to get to know, is it to lay a foundation for bilateral relationship. And if you think that King Bhumibol was so great in performing as goodwill ambassador, you would have thought that maybe the monarchy could play a role here as a kind of goodwill ambassador. So that's why I really want to see how Rama X could play this kind of goodwill ambassador. But my suspicion is that because of the thing that I said during my talk about the condition in the post-Cold War period that has unlocked, the expectation of the world, United States vis-a-vis Thai monarchy. So that's why, King Vajiralongkorn might think that then there would be no point for me to introduce myself, because international environment, would play so little in terms of promoting supporting his throne at home, if you know what I mean. The Cold War was important for the king because the role of the United States as superpower helped sustain the throne. But right now there is no Cold War condition. So, and the king is quite capable of supporting his own throne, with the support of any other institution in Thailand. So,
great. In the final few minutes, there's two related questions that are going back in historical time, which I think focus much more on what Ajahn Pavin's working on. One is from Greg Raman again. I'll ask them together. King Vajiralongkorn was himself briefly involved in fighting communists in the early 1970s around Phetchabun. Do we know if this experience influenced his views about communist China? And secondly, from Michael Van, was there a role for the Thai monarchy in regional Southeast Asia anti-communist politics during the Cold War? Aside from SEATO, how did the king work with other regional anti-communists?
Okay. Well, I think that the first one, from Ajahn Greg, Washington involving in the fighting against communist insurgency. I think the will of him vis-a-vis China communists today how would it be, right? Well, I think you talk about this issue, we have to think about the perception of China as how the public perceive the changing perception, but how the public perceive the changing image of China. If you understand that, maybe you understand, the perception of Vajiralongkorn toward China as well. Because even by the time of the US withdrew, from Vietnam, and then that led to the diplomatic normalization between Thailand and China in 1975. I think by then our perception vis-a-vis China had already started to change, from communist enemy to become communist friend, right? Then I think maybe by itself, I think the monarchy as a whole also had changed its perception toward China as well, right after 1975. And one evidence is basically, and this I will argue in my book, if King Bhumibol is the representation of the United States in Thailand, then Princess Sirinthorn would be the representation of China in Thailand too. So, father and daughter doing different things, but in terms of enhancing bilateral relations between, Thailand and United States on the one hand, and Thailand and China on the other hand. So, Princess Sirinthorn, playing such a great role in forging this, Thai-Chinese relations. So, because of that, I think in some way it helped change the perception, and I would not be surprised that King Vajiralongkorn by now would change his perception as well because of the country new perspective toward China. I hope it's not too confusing. As for Mike, what else that the monarchy has been doing in terms of fighting against communists during the Cold War? Well, I would say, apart from working closely with the United States, Thailand, right, engage in any other organization, ASA, Association for Southeast Asia. That one thing, right? Even coming together with ASEAN in 1967, you could say that this is an initiative, from Thailand. Not to forget that, ASEAN was built upon the Bangkok Declaration, right? So basically, Thailand has played a great role in setting up ASEAN. And that in public, ASEAN may argue that in 1967, they're coming together just because they just want to create an organization, and also to eliminate, conflict among member countries. But in fact, it was an anti-communist organization, which Thailand, has spearheaded, and Thailand became so successful in regionalized Thai policy vis-a-vis Southeast Asia. Vis-a-vis communist threat in Southeast Asia.
Okay, great. Well, thank you everyone for attending our talk today. We're really excited to hear some updates from Ajahn Pavin about this project. This is an important historical project that has implications to understanding Thai politics and the US-Thailand relations today. So we're finishing up for now. Our next talk, which will happen November 11, will be on the Election Commission of Thailand and its role in 2019 election, presented by Assistant Professor Sawani Alexander and Dr. Pretra Destova. And they posted the information here on the chat box, but you can also follow us on Facebook, as well as looking at all the schedules. We have speakers lined up all the way until October of 2022. So this is an opportunity for us in Sydney, but for scholars around the world, to make sure that we continue to promote the works of scholars across the different fields of social science, not just politics, but psychology, public health, that do work on Thailand, that we're able to get our work out to the public, but also to generate discussions and research ideas, but also just maintaining interest on relations with Thailand. So thank you very much for everyone for participating today, and have a great day. Thank you, Ajahn Pavin, for your valuable time. And may I say that your shirt looks very nice. Because you told me you haven't worn a shirt in a while, so it's a good opportunity to dress up. So thank you so much. And please stay in touch, everyone. Have a good day.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.